Hi everyone, this is Mari Craig, and you're listening to the Small Steps to Wellness show, a podcast where we discuss how we can achieve more wellness in our lives one small step at a time. For the past 6 odd years, I've taken a special interest in nutrition and I've changed the diet of my family on its head. But as I've dived deeper into the world of nutrition, I have learned that health is so much more than just what we put on our plate. This is why on this podcast we will be talking nutrition, mental health, being in alignment, holistic health care, self care, raising children, and more. We will also be hearing stories of women's journeys to overcome trauma and what it has taught them on the way. When we share our stories, we realize we are not alone and that things can change for the better. I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey as I explore what health and wellness truly encompass. If you like what you're hearing, please consider rating the show with a 5-star rating and sharing it with your friends. It really makes a big difference. Now, on with today's show.
Yeah, so if you hear me sounding really weird, it's just my Norwegian accent coming through because I've just been speaking lots of Norwegian this morning to my friends. So
Nice. Yeah. I got engaged in Norway. I think we were in, I should remember this. I think we stayed in Tromsø,
yeah.
And then we took we were on the Hurtigruten cruise ship and we went all the way up north. Kirkenes? Is that up north?
Yeah, Kirkenes. Yeah.
So we were up there when we got engaged at the Snow Hotel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues went up there. She went on a knitting cruise all the way up north, and she went to I don't think she stayed over there, but it looked amazing.
Yeah.
I've never been that far north. I've been to Tromsø, but that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Oh wow! Oh, that's interesting. Well, we got a connection already.
Yes, yeah.
And thanks for being with me, by the way, Ria. Really, I've heard so many good things about you, and to just everyone listening, my friend, who's also one of my, I guess, most avid listeners, she said to me, Mari, you have to get Ria on. She's fantastic. I think you'd have so much to talk about. You'd have such good conversations, and I'm just gonna connect you two if that's okay with you. I'm like, yes, please. And so, yeah, here we are. So I just thought I'd introduce you to anyone listening. So you're a maternal mental health and couples coach. That is so important. Helping to transform the lives of women struggling with anxiety, depression, trauma, or overwhelm. Overwhelm is a word I use a lot. And you wrote to me, you believe that helping women to feel emotionally strong, confident, and empowered creates happy, healthy families. I couldn't agree more. Where does this come from? How did you get, started with this?
So my eldest was born. He was the trigger really for me, completely changing my career because I didn't do this pre-kids. So he is nearly 8 years old. And when he was born, it literally changed my life, as it does for many people. My priorities changed, what I wanted in life changed. I was always, a very career-driven person before that. I'd work all the hours, I'd fly all over the world and do various things. And all of a sudden he arrived and I was like, I just need to be here. I need to be in this space where I'm the best mum that I can be to my boy. And so I started in a slightly different area of maternal mental health and well-being. So he came into the world, we'd planned a home birth. It went completely differently to that. We ended up consultant-led. I had a very unexpectedly complicated birth experience with him. But I came out of it still feeling like it was the most amazing thing that I had ever done, was bring him into the world. So initially, when he was newborn, I went and trained in perinatal mental health and antenatal education, because I was like, do you know what? We hear so many horror stories about birth, and we've got a bit of a view that if it goes according to plan and it's vaginal and it's calm and all of this stuff, then it's that perfect birth. If there's intervention and unexpected things, then it's some kind of trauma. And obviously for a lot of people that can be true. And because I'd had an unexpectedly complicated birth experience, but I still felt so empowered by it, I was driven to want to help other women believe that actually birth, however it happens, can be a really positive experience. It's just we get so hung up on it being the perfect birth that we almost set ourselves up for failure sometimes. So initially I went into supporting couples preparing for birth, and I specifically focused on people that had been through negative birth experiences and were having baby number 2 because they already had ingrained trauma from that first experience there. So I worked with them specifically for quite a few years, helping them to deal with that trauma and grief to a certain extent. Is that grief of what you wanted that birth experience to be like, and your motherhood journey. So if you go into motherhood already with trauma, it's likely to be quite a difficult experience in those first few months or year of motherhood. So I supported them in that area for the first couple of years after I was qualified. And then COVID hit, and in my audience, their needs completely drastically changed. Obviously, there was still a lot of fear about giving birth because now they couldn't have birth partners and all their birth choices were limited. But people were coming to me now, not just being nervous about giving birth, but there was something about COVID that re-triggered so many different life experiences in people that was kind of being projected onto pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. So during COVID, I retrained as an emotional health coach for perinatal mental health. And now I support people in all areas of their life. So anxiety, depression, trauma, overwhelm, which, you know, all mothers go through periods of overwhelm, but it's very much an accepted part of motherhood where it doesn't always necessarily need to be. And then I also branched out into couples therapy. So helping couples that have lost their spark in parenthood because there's that kind of disconnect. Your focus is all on the kids. So yeah, I've been doing it for just over 7 years now, supporting people in this area, and I just love it. But like I said to you, I honestly believe that mums are the core of the family unit in terms of, you know, it's that happy mum, happy baby setup, isn't it? If mum's not happy or she's struggling, it's going to have a ripple effect through everybody else. And, you know, I've had my own ups and downs through motherhood, and with every child that you have, I'm a mum of 3 now, there's different challenges and different experiences, and the demand on your time, your body, your energy, everything is just, you know, it's massive. So I want to be, I think my mission, I guess, in this is that I want to be the person for mums and couples that I wish I had in my corner when I was like, am I feeling the right way? Does it always feel this hard? Is it just that I'm not doing it right? It's all that kind of self-doubt stuff that we all come up against. But so much of it isn't necessarily about motherhood. It's about other things that get re-triggered in motherhood. So those kind of experiences that we've had that have been unresolved or unprocessed, or we think we've moved past, now all of a sudden we've got all of these big feelings and we're like, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. But actually so much of it, 9 times out of 10, I find with the women that come to me, the problem that presents itself, so what they think is the issue, is never really the issue. It's so much deeper than that, but we bury all of that stuff because it's way too hard to face a lot of the time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'd love to hear excuse me, some examples of that. I think I'm nodding throughout. I didn't see me like, yeah, feel that. So I kind of wish that I knew you when I had my first child, but actually you wouldn't be working as what you're doing now because she's nearly 11. But I felt when I had her, because I did the NCT, which was pretty lovely, but I had this pressure on myself from a very young age that I was going to do really well. Always sort of perform and always get good results. I was very academic at school, and so this became kind of my identity. And when I then gave birth to her and ended up having an epidural, I felt like a massive failure. And then she ended up being in the intensive care unit only for a few days, but then sort of the whole breastfeeding, you know, learning to breastfeed was a bit trickier. And so it took me a while to bond with her, probably as a result of all of it, and also as a result of, excuse my French, shit, I'm a mum, gosh, I'm the person in charge, what on earth, you know? So yeah. And then when I had my second daughter, I was like, right, this time I'm just going to do it. So I went, she was born in like the birthing suite, and all I had was gas and air, and it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But I still then left feeling, oh, I'm not very good at this birth giving thing, which is insane, right? Absolutely insane. But it took me, so I had them when I was 31 and 33, 34, something like that. 30, yeah. And but it took me until the age of, I wasn't quite 41, I was 2 weeks off when I had my last baby last year, that I felt like I'm in charge. It doesn't matter how what I do, how this goes. I'm going to do what works for me. And interestingly, they wanted to induce me because of my age and because I had some complications with my second birth because of a lot of bleeding. And I didn't want to be induced initially, because I was like, right, this time, the third time, I'm going to just, do it like the way Mother Nature intended it to be done, right? And then I got to the consultant appointment at week 38 or something, and they were like, so how are you feeling? Because throughout the whole thing I said, no, I don't want to be induced, this is all fine, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't want to be. And then I got to that appointment, and I was just like, okay, when can you induce me? I am done with this thing, right? And so I went in a couple of days before my due date, 3 days before, and they started on the whole induction process. Nothing really happened. And so eventually, went to the on the ward, and they broke my waters, and they said, if nothing else happens, we're going to put you on a drip. And then that's when it can be a bit intense. And I was lying there, and I was just thinking, who the hell do I think that I'm proving anything to by doing this? So then in the end, I was like, I think I want an epidural, please. And I couldn't believe that those words came out of my mouth. So I had the most medicalized birth that, apart from C-section, I suppose. And it was the best experience ever.
Yeah.
And I thought, but if that had been way back when, I would have felt like, oh, I failed again, because mums have done this for donkeys. Why can't I? I have friends that have had, home births in pools, and why can't I? I'm sure I could have. But also I was lying there thinking, I'm going to be, strapped onto all these machines and everything because it's an induction. Why do I want to do this to myself? Who am I trying to prove anything to? And he was born, and I was just like, probably also be high on something. I was in euphoria. And it's weird, isn't it? How I got to the age of nearly 41. And that's when I felt like I can advocate for myself, and I can do this for me. I have my own boundaries. I'm not proving anything to anyone.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think, we, like I said before, we do have this view that textbook straightforward births are going to be really positive and medicalized ones are going to be really negative. But actually, like, birth trauma particularly doesn't really come from necessarily physically what happens to you, but the way that you feel about what happens.
Yeah.
So you could have a really straightforward home birth in a pool and it all seem like the absolute perfect scenario, but if you feel differently about it, it's not going to feel like a positive experience. Or you could go into an unplanned C-section and have all the intervention and everything else, none of which you ever wanted, but if you feel the right way, that it's always the feeling that connects you to whether it's traumatic or positive. It's not about really how they enter into the world. But yeah, I think it's interesting you bring that up, because I see in so many of my mums that I work with that need to feel like they've like passed the test.
Yes.
Like, if I did it right, I've passed the test, I've got the A grade. And like, you've already linked that back to in childhood, you were academic, you got the grades, like that was your thing and it's formed part of your identity. And I see that a lot in a lot of my high functioning anxiety mums, that they've got this kind of aura about, I am the one that succeeds at things. So anything, whether it's giving birth, like I have to make sure that I give birth in the right way, so that other people think, wow, didn't she do a good job? Or even, that can show itself in motherhood, like when you have those really difficult days with the kids and you're getting irritable and stressed, and it's not necessarily the kids, it's the fact that internally you're saying, I'm failing at this because I'm not able to soothe them or calm them or distract them. And it's all of those same things. I'm failing this test of motherhood, and it comes up time and time again. And it's so interesting. But again, you think, who are you proving it to? It's almost like people feel like they're being watched and judged all the time on how they give birth and how they parent. But actually, so much of that pressure comes from an internal place, and we project it out onto other people. Like, well, my dad will expect me to be this way, or my partner's going to expect this. But so many of those belief systems actually are internal belief systems. But it's much easier, you know, we're very good at burying the things that feel difficult, and it's much easier to say, well, I feel like my dad expects this or my partner expects this, than it is to say, actually, this is what I believe to be true about myself, because that's a little bit more vulnerable and painful. So yeah, we project a lot of stuff out, but yeah, that internal pressure is very real, and we've got an idea in our head as to how we think motherhood should look, or how we think birth should look, based on the messaging that we've had, probably from our own mums a lot of the time. Because when I look back, I think for my mum, she was always, in my memory, so cool, calm and collected. She never raised her voice. Like, she was the perfect mum in my head. But it's probably actually that I just don't remember the moments where she got stressed and irritable and shouty. I remember all of the good bits, which is also what our kids are going to remember too. And that we're not robots. Like, it's okay to have feelings about stuff. It's okay to have off days. You can't be on it 100% all the time and doing all the things. We've just got to cut ourselves some slack sometimes in those moments where we feel like we're failing, or that we've not had the best day. Like, and then use some tools to think, right, how can I reset myself, because I don't want to keep repeating this day or doing these same things over and over. But, you know, there's so much pressure on mums, I think, just to have it all together all the time and do it all with a smile on your face. The amount of people I've heard that have come to me and said, I shouldn't be feeling this way because this is what I always wanted. And you're like, yeah, of course it is. You planned to have a kid. You wanted a family. Like, you've got your dream. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy all the time. And that's okay. Same as you might have the perfect job, or the job you've always dreamed of. It's going to be stressful at times. Your marriage is going to be stressful at times. They're all things you wanted. You're in the house you've maybe always dreamt of, but it doesn't mean the mortgage isn't going to stress you out all the time. But with motherhood, there's this expectation that this is what you wanted, so get on with it, enjoy it, don't ever moan about what's going on. And that pressure is massive for mums. Like, it's okay to have a really rubbish day, or to feel like you don't want to do it. Like, I remember having those feelings myself. I just don't want to mum today. It's too much. And then, you know, that's where a lot of mum guilt can kick in, because actually what those kind of feelings are showing you is you need to rest. Your needs are not being met. If you're getting to the stage where you're like, I want out, like, this is too much, you haven't given yourself time to rest and reset. But when we try and do that, we then get the mum guilt. I shouldn't be away from my kids. I shouldn't be letting other people look after them, even if it's their dad, or, you know, and it's just, you're stuck always in this cage of, this is what I wanted and I should be here 100% of the time.
Yeah, it's not, that's not healthy for anyone though.
No.
It's, there's so much that comes up for me when you talk about this. The first thing is, and I'll park that one for later, but how do we break that cycle for our kids? And I have some thoughts on that. But where does this come from, these expectations that we carry internally? Because we're not born with these expectations, I would have thought, internally. I mean, there's probably some epigenetics at play here, from coming down, being passed down from our mums, etc. But when you do couples therapy, I guess, surely you must notice also a difference in how dads perceive all of this. They surely don't have the same type of pressure, or feel the same type of pressure. So where does this come from, that we always have to be there, keep calm and carry on, and just take it all in our stride? Where does that, do you think it's literally just passed down?
I think it's decades, or, you know, decades worth of messaging. And what I think people are struggling with a lot at the moment as well is, we are really the first generation of mums that are being told you can do it all, you can have the kids, you can run your own business, you can do all of these things, and isn't it amazing and empowering? But we're not going to give you the support systems to help you. The childcare will cost too much. We don't always live with our village where people can just help out, you know, at a drop of a hat. So the role of a mother has changed massively over the last, you know, few years or decade or so. Whereas before it was very much like, you know, more gender defined roles. The dads, you get 2 weeks off when your baby comes, and you go back to work. Life doesn't change. You bring in the money, you support the household. Mums, largely like my mum's generation, stayed at home with the kids, and that's what they did, and that's what was accepted and worked in that time. But now we've got a generation of mums who do also want to work or need to work, whatever the circumstances are, but nothing else has changed to support that. So if we are wanting to be a mum, but also needing to work or wanting to work, there's that pressure of, well, I feel like I'm having to do both sides of this now, but the role of the dad or the partner hasn't changed, where they're picking up more. So they're still just going to work and doing what they do. We're doing everything else now. But we don't have the support system to actually help us to be able to do that. So now we feel like we're not being present enough as mums, which makes you feel like a failure. We're also not being present enough in our jobs or our businesses, which also makes you feel like a failure. So we can do it all, and it's all very empowering, but we're doing it all at like 60-70% because you just can't physically stretch yourself across so many different areas and not feel like something's slipping all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of generational stuff there. Like we tend to repeat the patterns of our own parents in terms of how we parent, how we show up in relationships. In couples therapy particularly, I will get people come to me because they say we've had kids and we've just lost that connection. We don't really feel like a team anymore. But actually, most of the time when we go through the program together, what comes up is their generational patterns, and where they've come from, either childhoods where there was a lot of trauma, so they had emotionally absent parents, or childhoods where one or other of the parent just wasn't a part of that family unit at all. That I think we can grow up, and you get to a point where you think, right, I'm old enough to leave home, where maybe that's not felt like the safest place for me to be, and I've sorted my life out, I've got my own place, I've got my own job, and we can kind of ignore a lot of that childhood trauma for a long time until you get into a place where you're now in a long-term relationship and you're a parent, and now all of that trauma comes back and says, don't forget, all of our messaging is based on this, and now you're trying to do something else. And that's where a lot of that friction actually comes from, that you start seeing a distance in people because it's not necessarily that you don't have time for each other anymore or you're too focused on the kids. It's just now we're trying to create a healthy family and a healthy relationship when we've never been shown how to do that. Or one of them might have come from a really healthy, positive household and the other one hasn't. And now they're trying to create a new life together. So so much about what goes on in our past will affect us in the present day if we haven't had time or the ability or the tools to actually process that.
Yeah.
And I see a lot in the mums that feel like they're failing and not good enough. A lot of their background will come from bullying at school, which is exactly what I had. My feelings of failure were all linked back to bullying at school, and I see that a lot in mums. So it's often not necessarily that they're not doing a good, they're never not doing a good enough job. Everyone's doing their best, but it's just those same feelings get re-triggered, like I'm not good enough. Maybe they were right that I'm just not good enough as who I am as a person. So I see a lot of that childhood trauma coming through as well, bullying. But trauma, we always expect it to be a really big event. It doesn't have to be. It's not always about a death or bullying or all of those kind of things. It can be sometimes just one little moment that has felt really traumatic for somebody, that we hold on to, because I think trauma and grief, we're all going to go through those things at some point in our lives. We're never given any tools to actually deal with it, other than with time it's going to get better. Actually, it's just with time you learn to bury it and focus on something else instead. So yeah, that's what I see coming up a lot for people. It goes so much deeper than just thinking my birth didn't go to plan or I'm struggling in motherhood. It's never just about that. It's about so much more that we've just ignored for a long time.
Wow. Oh, Ria, you're so good. I read a book, see up on my shelf now. It's called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate.
Oh yes.
Oh, it's just absolute gold. And he talks about exactly this, that it doesn't have to be trauma with a capital T.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about what happened to you. It's about what you said earlier. It's about how that makes you feel or what imprint that leaves on you.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, are we the first generation? So I can't remember, it might just be that I buried it as well, my parents kind of apologizing for getting it wrong, because that's not how they were brought up. Parents were just like, this is what goes because I say so.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if we're also the first generation where we have more open conversations with our children, so we're not kind of on the same level as them. It's not a friendship,
Mm-hmm.
but we are not also so out of reach when it comes to having conversations that we can't go, gosh, mommy, sorry, I lost it a bit there, I'm so sorry, let me explain why. I was really stressed, and when you said this, in my head I was hearing blah blah blah, so this is why I reacted the way I did. I shouldn't have done that. I hope you can understand where that came from. It's all, I feel like I can't remember having had those conversations with my parents, and I wonder if that's also a recurring theme, that we're trying to be slightly more approachable,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't necessarily have the experiences or the tools, to teach us how to do that. But I wonder if that's also going back to the question I had earlier about how we can break this cycle, how we can maybe pass on to our children that they didn't have to have it all together, and then that we literally just talk.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, we're the first ones that are being more approachable and more accountable for our actions.
Yeah.
So I think in previous generations, it was very much like you say, what I say goes. And if you mess up, you just think, oh, well, I'm the parent and I know best kind of attitude. Even if I don't feel great about what happened. But yeah, absolutely. Like, we're very much a generation that are going through a rupture and repair process all the time. You can have these bad days and these big emotional blowouts. But then we'll go and say, look, I'm sorry about earlier. This is how I was feeling. And that repair process, I think, is so crucial to teaching kids it's okay to have emotions. Again, a lot of things that I see in the people that I work with is feelings of from their childhood, that if I just felt normal or happy, that was acceptable. If I felt any kind of big or difficult emotion, I'd have to isolate, or I would be isolated. Anger, upset, any of that kind of stuff just wasn't okay. So where we go through this repair process with our kids and we explain why we're feeling the way we're feeling and what's going on, they can see physically in front of them that, okay, sometimes mummy gets angry or she gets upset, but they always know the reasons why. So they're not left with any lingering feelings of, did I do something wrong? Was that me? Did I fail her in some way? And I think that's really powerful, to have those conversations and be vulnerable enough to say, I messed up. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said those things, or I shouldn't have acted that way. To have that vulnerability, so they see you as a human and not like one step above them all the time. As I think I definitely grew up with that visual of thinking, like, once you're a grown up or a parent, you've got everything sussed all the time. And then I've got to that age myself and I'm like, okay, I don't feel that way.
I'm just winging it.
I'm just winging it every day. Yeah, every day is a new challenge, but I don't feel like I've necessarily like stepped into those grown-up shoes. But I think that was just almost the persona that adults had at that time. Whereas now we are much more open and vulnerable to saying, this is how I'm feeling and what's going on and how do you feel. I have a lot of conversations with my kids about how they feel. They don't always know based on their ages. So with my kids, I'll say to them, they can't always label their feelings. Like my kids are 7, 6 and 3, so they can't always say I feel upset or cross or whatever it might be. So I will say to them, what color are your feelings and what shape are they and where are they in your body? So it makes them a more tangible thing. rather than this feeling that's just streaming through all parts of them that feels a bit uncontrollable. And once they can make it a certain thing, it's easier for them to disperse that and be like, okay, this is why I was feeling the way I was, and then they can start putting words to it. But yeah, I don't ever remember having conversations like that either with my parents, but it's definitely in our household something that we're talking about a lot, and it's okay to mess up, and it's okay to say you're sorry, and it's okay to feel angry and big emotions, because it's just part and parcel of life. And like anger particularly is more of a transitionary state. It tends to be hiding things like shame and guilt that feel too hard to talk about. It's easier to be angry than it is to sit in a corner and feel shameful about something. But yeah, equipping our kids with the ability to recognize that we're human and to talk about how they're feeling as well. You know, my middle child particularly, he can be very vocal about how he feels about something. And it can be triggering as a mum if it feels like they're saying, you didn't do a good enough job then. And you're like, oh God, your insides kind of just want to shrivel up and die. But I try and look at it in those moments as like, gosh, you're 6 and you're telling me that wasn't good enough. I didn't like that. You're like, okay, like we can have a conversation about this now. And that's, you know, having those conversations can only lead to positive growth. Whereas if we hide it and mask it all the time, we're not doing ourselves any favors, and we're definitely not doing them any favors either.
No, definitely. I'm just listening to that and thinking about how, so my eldest daughter loves to read. She reads, you know, one of those really thick books a week probably. And my youngest daughter, she is not a big fan. But obviously for school you need to read. And this is one of those, just sit down and read. Yes, I am doing it. Is, you know, the response. And now I'm thinking, gosh, she's getting angry because she knows this is what she should be doing. She knows she kind of isn't so keen on it. And she sees her big sister, who she looks up to, devouring books. What she doesn't see is that to her, other things come a lot easier than to her sister. She only sees, obviously, where she feels sort of lacking. And she kind of lashes out quite a lot, but it is frustration, isn't it, with herself often, because I know I should be doing this. I'm not really interested. I find it tricky. I'm gonna just be angry with my mum because she's making me do this that I don't want to do. So we do have a lot of conversations around it, but again, as a parent, you only have so much patience to go, come on, let's sit down together, and how about, you know, sit down somewhere quietly, and, you know, I can read my book next to you, la, la. But then there's also 2 other kids, you know, and then there's the dog, and then you're just like, okay, and also I've got to cook the dinner, and, you know, so it's just, so it's you kind of, I see very clearly now that you've said these things that I need to approach things with her differently, but at the same time it's just like reality, just sit somewhere in the corner and read. But actually
it's not always possible, is it, to approach everything in the right way all the time? Again, that's a form of perfectionism, isn't it? I've got to do it perfectly every single time. But perfect just doesn't exist. So if that's what we're aiming for, we're always going to feel like we're taking a step back or that we're failing at something. I think, but you've just got to think of it as, you know, if you're approaching it in the right way most of the time, that's what they're going to be remembering. And again, it's okay, because obviously for us, we might feel like we've got a bit of a checklist of stuff in our head, haven't we, that we've got to do every day to get through the day. And homework becomes one of those things. And for us, we think, well, just read and then it's done, put it back in your book bag and it's done, it's over with, isn't it? But, you know, for her, it might be just something completely different from her perspective. But yeah, I think if we just approach it in the best way that we can most of the time, like, that's good enough. Some days you're just going to be too tired or too overwhelmed or too short fused to deal with it properly, and that's okay too. Like, it's fine if things don't go to plan, but there might also be an element within there of where you've said before about feeling like you've got to prove yourself to people. Like, well, if you get it done, then we can prove to your teacher that you're doing all the right things. Whereas she's not going to have that need to prove anything to anyone. She either wants to read or she doesn't, and that it's as simple as that to her. So I remember going through a period of school runs being really difficult, like just to even get them out of the house and get their shoes on, and how frustrated I would get at having to ask 3 kids to get their shoes on 20 times every morning. And it would get really stressy. And I suddenly realized that actually I'm getting stressed because I feel the pressure to get to school on time, because I don't want the teachers to be like, oh, they're late again. And that feeling of judgment. Well, if I'm late, I'm going to get a bit of a name for myself. And I got to a point where I was like, what I need to focus on instead is what they need in this moment, because sometimes they're not just not putting their shoes on because they're not hearing you or they don't want to. Sometimes they need something else. So I took more time in those moments to connect with them, rather than just being like, get your shoes on, get your shoes on, get your shoes on, is to actually connect and be like, what do you need from me right now? And sometimes it was just a hug. Sometimes they just wanted to tell me something first. And I was like, actually, what's more important is that they feel seen and heard in those moments, rather than we get to school on time. And I stopped caring about the time that we got to school and started caring more about, okay, maybe for them, I'm trying to get out the door. They've still got stuff going on in their little lives in that moment that they want to be able to communicate. And we ended up, I think a couple of times as we transitioned through that, we ended up being late for school. And I thought, you know what, they're not missing out on anything. They might miss the register. It's not holding them back in any way. It's fine. And the more that I gave them that space in the mornings, the more we got to school on time, because they were feeling seen and heard. And then it only took me saying, put your shoes on, maybe 2 or 3 times instead of 20 times, and it happened. I think, again, like we were saying earlier, like before the podcast, when I go out for walks with them, they will stop and look at every single flower and bee and everything. And I'm like, come on, we'll get to the shop. And it's the same in that morning school run, that I'm on a, like, I've got my blinkers on, I just want to get to school. But they're like, oh, what about this? And what about this? And I want to tell you about my dream last night. And we've lost that ability just to appreciate the moment that we're in and slow things down a little bit. And they're very much in that space still. Everything is fascinating to them, and every conversation they have is like the best thing they've ever thought about. And it's very easy for us to be like, yeah, okay, great, like, let's go, and just completely dismiss it. But actually, we're missing so much of the magic in those little moments, and so much of the joy, which is ultimately what we all want in motherhood, is to feel the magic and the joy. But we can bypass it with to-do lists and deadlines and, you know, all the other stuff, and we get lost in the busyness of life too much.
Yeah, because we have this need to also show that we've got everything organized. We've got all our ducks in a row. And, you know, let's also not forget our Insta life or our Facebook life or whatever it is that needs to have regular updates, and creating memories, you know, all of those hashtags as well. And we were just saying before, I was just re-listening to a voice note you sent me, wasn't I? And you were like, oh, you also listened to it on like 1.5 times speed. And it's kind of, I guess it's like a symptom or a sign of the times, isn't it, really? That we're like, well, I don't have time to listen to it in the way you said it. I'm just going to blast through. And I'm walking the dog, and now I've learned better. But I remember a dog trainer you said to me, look, you make the dog sit and watch telly with you for a couple of hours every night. And, or she didn't say you, but like, we do that. The least we can give them back is the time to sniff all the lampposts they want to sniff. I mean, this is their playtime. So it's not about walking far. It's about, fine, if you've got to get to school, obviously you need to get to school, but it's about, you know, just the journey itself, just being out. It doesn't matter. It's about those little moments, and easier said than done, I have to say, because sometimes she's like, come on, you know. But if we can, at least some of the times, or at least on the way back from school, just take time to like, oh, let's do this detour, or do you want to stay here for a bit? Then, oh, that's an interesting stone, or what have you. You know, just if we can build in those kind of things, I think that's not just beneficial for our children, but it must be beneficial for us as well.
Yeah.
To kind of break out of that trauma of I've got to have everything sorted. It's interesting what you're saying about the whole perfectionism as well. I've felt for a number of years like I can't get it all right, and I'm not a very tidy person by nature, as my friends will attest to, but it's not a complete and utter mess, but I've also now learned to let go and just to go, do you know what? Yes, that's still on the counter or what have you, but I'm just going to sit down with a cup of tea because that's what I need right now. And or I'm going to cuddle up with my child because I haven't actually spoken to them all day. That's what matters. And the mess is not going to go anywhere. You know, I wouldn't show off my house in I don't know, living, etc. But also, why do I need to?
Yeah, I think, it's so interesting with stuff like that, that is, you know, that mental to-do list is always going to be there. Even if you clean the counter now, you're going to need to do it again tomorrow because someone else will put something down. So what I always try and say to myself, particularly when the kids are out of the house and they're all at school, is in those moments, if I'm not working, is I could easily get on with the laundry and the tidying up and all of the other stuff. But when they're not here, I will think to myself, or even when they are here, what is it I can do right now that is going to add value to my life? And that is rest. It's reading a book. It's listening to a podcast. It's cuddling with the kids. Like, what can I do that is actually going to make me feel connected to my life in the way that I want to? And I mean, I guess I have perfectionist streaks as well sometimes. Like I hate to relax and be able to see stuff that I know I need to put away or do. But all of that stuff is always going to be there. It's always going to be there. There's always going to be something else to tidy. And I don't want to live my life always saying to my kids, just wait a minute, I'm just doing this, just wait a minute. Because that's not what I had them for, so that they can watch me tidy up all the time. So yeah, I'll give myself now those dedicated moments in the day where I'm like, right, I've got half an hour before I've got to go and do the school run. What can I do that is just for me, that is going to fill my cup, recharge my batteries, so that when the kids get home, because it can be a bit of an onslaught sometimes if I've been home alone all day and then all of a sudden I have 3 kids come back at the same time, all of a sudden it's loud, there's mess within seconds. So I think, what can I do right now that is just going to be for me, because I need to recharge my batteries before doing the school run, dinner time, bath time, bedtime routine. And then those last few hours of the day are crazy busy. If I don't rest now or do something for me, I'm probably not going to get the chance to. And then another day has gone past where I've not looked after myself. And it's so easy to fall into a trap of, I'll do all of the housework stuff and the chores and the tidying up, because, you know, we do get to tick that off a list and it makes us feel more accomplished. And for a lot of mums, it can make them feel a bit more worthy and valuable if they can prove that they've done stuff that day. Because as a society, we don't really see any value in the fact that a lot of the time, particularly if you've got young kids that are still at home, we don't see any value in the fact that what you've done is nurtured a child all day and cared for them, and, you know, all those things that are helping them to create the person that they are. We don't see any value in that. It's not there's no job title, is there, particularly? There's no reward chart. There's no milestones you're getting through. And we're very used to, you know, from a really young age of being like, right, you go through school, you're going to be rewarded for all of the grades that you get in stuff. So it's no wonder that becomes such a solid part of people's personality, being successful. And then you've got to go out to work and you've got to get the good job and the good salary and the good house and the good car, and everything is very much linked into physical, no, what's the right word? Not physical thing, materialistic stuff. Yeah. Things that you can prove to somebody else. Well, I've got the latest car, I'm earning this much money. But none of that matters, and none of it's going to be written on your gravestone when you die, but people will remember the person that you were and how much you loved them and how present you were. Your legacy isn't in all of the other stuff that you had. And I try and remind myself of that a lot. Because I think, you know, with my kids, even the ages they are now, I think, how are you not all still newborns? Like, I feel like I had you yesterday. And I think it's not going to be long before they're grown up and moved out and they've got families of their own. And I'll think, where did all that time go? I want to try and savor it as much as I can in the moment, no matter how stressful or overwhelming it might feel at times, because they won't be here forever, and they're not always going to want your cuddles and snuggles on the sofa and bedtime stories. And that's where I think we just need to learn to slow down so that we're in the moment a bit more. rather than always telling ourselves we've got to prove ourselves via how much work we get done in the house if we're not working and physically bringing in money, you know, financially. Then I need to prove that actually I'm good enough at all this other stuff. But all you're here for really is to raise your kids and help them find their place in the world. Just nobody sees any value in that, and that's such a tragic thing, I think.
Yeah, it really is. It's such an important job, because you want to raise children that can function in the real world. You want to raise children that are going to be happy and know their worth in the real world. Because if you see your worth as, you know, whatever you can achieve, which is definitely how I've seen myself, and actually also why I've been finding it tricky to not go back to work, like the 9 to 5, because I feel like I've got to, you know, why can't I do it? Or why, I mean, I could do it, but I think I would be, you know, having nervous breakdowns all the time. But I think we've got a massive task on our hands in creating well-functioning children that are going to, yes, they know their worth, know that it's not all about this competition and getting to the top of the ladder all the time. It's about like true happiness. It's massive. I'd like to know though, when you do your couples therapy and you talked about coming from different families, how that can, you know, have you got any sort of stories of how eye-opening that's been for couples when they've kind of realized, oh wow, this is kind of where this comes from? Or because one person might be like seeing this is how we obviously are going to do things, and the other person has had a completely different experience. How do you sort of, well, literally marry those two?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky and often quite emotional process to go through. So I had one couple recently who came, the woman in the couple came from a really difficult background. She had an absent dad. She had a mum who was very emotionally abusive to her. So her feelings of being a failure and not good enough went all the way back to being 5 years old. And she had a very specific memory of some things that her mum had said to her. And then the dad in the relationship came from, you know, by all intents and purposes, a really emotionally well family, and they were quite close. And so for them, they're obviously aware, obviously, of their backgrounds, but now they're trying to kind of be together in a relationship, and they're trying to almost fit each other into each other's molds. And that can be a really difficult thing, and obviously not necessarily the route that you want to go down. So what we found within that particular session or that particular program was, now they'd become a family, they'd had a couple of kids of their own, is that the woman in that relationship was all of a sudden really worried about, well, when I was this age that my eldest daughter is, that's when my dad left. So she unknowingly had an expectation that, okay, I've been with this guy for, I think it was about 10 years they'd been together. We've been together for 10 years. We're in a really long-term relationship, but there was an added pressure of becoming a mum that was re-triggering her trauma from when she was younger. Like, this was when my dad left. So now I subconsciously am expecting that that same cycle is going to happen now. So she was very much keeping him at arm's length. Like, I can't let you get too close. The stakes are too high here. I need to protect me and my daughter, because mentally what happens, your brain doesn't know the difference between real and fake events. So whether something happens now or you imagine it, your body assumes that that's what's going on. So where she had had this expectation that at any moment he's going to go now, because this is the age that I was, from a subconscious point of view, you're already starting to detach yourself, because what we want to do is protect ourselves. Like, I don't want to feel the way that I feel when my dad left, and I don't want my daughters to feel that way either. So I'm going to emotionally detach. Whereas he's come from a really healthy family, and he wants to talk about it. He wants to help her through it. You know, he's trying to really connect in those moments where she's trying to take a step back. So I think once we actually identified that that's what her issue was, like, she obviously consciously knew my dad left at this age. She hadn't emotionally connected to, that's why I'm now feeling like I need to push you away. And even there was a little bit of resentment there, as though she was emotionally responding to her partner now as though he was her dad, which can happen an awful lot. So when those same feelings get triggered in you, what we tend to do is regress back to the moment that that trigger was first created. And what she's emotionally responding to is that memory of her dad leaving. It's not what's going on in front of her, because actually what he was showing her was love and understanding and compassion and safety and security. She couldn't see that because she was working on those old triggers, which were taking her back in time to when they were set. So once we connected those dots and she could see why she was keeping him at arm's length, it brings down a wall, like, oh, of course, like it's like taking a breath out and you just shrug all that stress off. It's like, okay, that makes more sense to me now, and I can see how you're almost unknowingly trying to recreate the patterns that you experience because it's all that you know. All that you knew was somebody walking away at a time when it mattered the most. Once you can have that awareness of, okay, I'm dragging past trauma into my present day. As soon as you've got that awareness, it's much easier to push that trauma back to where it should have stayed, essentially. And you know, that was a massive turning point for them in breaking down those barriers and being able to reconnect. But then looking at how you can create what you want your family unit to look like. It doesn't need to be based on your trauma or your healthy family. Create what you want for you and your family going forwards, and that can be really quite freeing. So I think even when you've come from a really positive household, if you're trying to fit somebody else into that mold, it's never going to work anyway. So it's giving you the time and the space to say, okay, what do we want our life to look like? What do we want as part of a healthy relationship? And so much of that, again, same as trauma, is going to be based on how you feel. It's not going to be necessarily where you live or what jobs you're doing and all of that kind of stuff. It's going to be, how do I want my life to feel rather than what do I want it to look like? And when the feeling is right, everything else falls into place behind that.
Yes. This is what I'm learning at the moment as well, that it doesn't matter about which holidays you go on or what car you drive, or you know, or none of those things, or what your children achieve. It matters, you know, just being together and how that makes you feel, and you know, lowering your shoulders, because that's, you know, not eventually, but that creates for a more, you know, healthy you and more calm you and a more present you. That's the stuff that matters. I don't The more I was always thinking, oh, I want to travel to all these places and I see the world and do all these things. And I said to my friend the other day, I quite like going on holiday in the UK. I quite like sort of going for day trips from my house. It's not about, you know, she says, having gone on an epic 1 month car journey throughout Northern Europe this summer. But that aside, it wasn't even about where we went. It was about that we went together. And yes, it was bloody exhausting, and I'm not sure I want to do it again. But you know, those moments where, you know, we were all on an overnight ferry together, 5 of us and a dog in one sort of cabin, and we lived to see the next day, and we were on deck the next morning at 7, so ridiculously tired but happy. That's what it's about. It's not about the luxury holidays or anything like that. It's about those small sort of pockets that's what you want to remember. That's what you want your children to remember, and I suppose build their lives on. We did these things and it was great. And yes, and my mum lost it with us a couple of times, but who wouldn't? And you know, that this is really powerful stuff. I've got so many thoughts going through my head now. I don't think I need to share them all on the podcast, but I think this is really powerful stuff. And the thing about not forcing your partner to fit into this cookie cutter or mold that actually they can't fit into. So love them for who they are, and let them be them, and work out how do we, you know, create our own thing based on who we are, not based on what we think we should be doing or what, you know, our past has been like, or any of those things. It is so powerful. And the whole thing that you're saying about the body doesn't know what's real and what's imagined. I think I remember listening to a podcast with Dr. Joe Dispenza where he talks about just this, that it doesn't matter, it's the same feeling in your body. And interestingly, when you said that she's going back to this moment of trauma, I think often, not I think, I know, often your body will stick with what it knows, even if that's really painful.
Yeah.
Because you know what you have, or you know what you're getting, but you don't know what this other thing is. That can be absolutely amazing. That's completely unknown. So it's very much like a self-preservation thing. As long as I stay alive, that's my job done.
Yeah. It's almost like better the devil you know. And this is exactly the obstacle that I see come up for a lot of people that might even reach out to me because they're anxious or they're going through depression or grief or trauma, is that they'll reach out and say, right, this is what's going on, and we'll have a chat, and I'll be like, look, come through my program, we can definitely get you to a much better place than this. And that is the thing that stops them. Like, I know what it feels like to be anxious. I might not like it, but I know these thoughts, they're familiar to me, these feelings are familiar, and I am just as scared of being not anxious as I am of staying this way for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and because this defines me.
Yeah, exactly. And what we want to do naturally as humans is find the path of least resistance. We want to do the easy thing. And the easiest thing is to stay anxious or to stay in your grief or stay in your trauma because you know it and it's familiar ground. Whereas if you think, well, if I do manage to get rid of all of this weight that I've got on my back, I've no idea what life is going to look like or feel like for me. And that makes me feel a little bit vulnerable. Whereas it feels like I've got control over this. I recognize what this anxiety feels like for me. And like overthinking gives you a false sense of control. So all of these habits that a lot of people have created make them feel like they're in control of being in a difficult situation. People's fear of failure is just as bad as their fear of success. So we let ourselves stay stuck a lot of the time. But yeah, that's the biggest obstacle for a lot of people, that they're like, okay, I've felt this way for 20 years. If I let go of it now, what does that mean for me? I understand logically that you might say you'll have more headspace, you'll have more emotional energy, you'll appreciate the smaller moments again, you'll have time to breathe and relax, but they don't believe that that's ever going to be true for them. So they don't do anything. Or some people will, enjoy is not quite the right word, but they like living in a space where that transformation or that change will happen one day. So it's always on the horizon. It's a hope for the future. But when I say to them, right, okay, I can help you with this, come through my program. In 8 to 13 sessions, you can be in that space that you've always wanted to be in. That can sometimes feel like a now or never moment. Like, oh, okay, this has always been a hope for the future, like a dangling carrot. If I commit and do something now, in 13 weeks or 13 sessions, I could feel much better, but it also means that over the next 13 weeks, there's a massive chance of failure, because what if it doesn't work for me? What if I'm no better off? Which is obviously never the case for people. They're always better off. But I'm always like, well, you can either go through the program and be better off in 8 to 13 sessions. And if you're not going to be in any worse place than you are right now. So it's a win-win situation for me. But that fear of, oh my gosh, if I do it now and I fail, it also takes that hope away from the future, because it feels like this is going to be my last ditch attempt.
And it's another thing I'm not good at.
Yeah, it's another thing I might fail at and I can't do any more, because that might be the thing that just tips me over the edge. So people stay stuck for so long. And obviously I wouldn't be providing the services I did if I didn't genuinely believe that they are going to see a transformation and a change. For some people, it takes longer than others because, there's such big traumas or experiences there. But rather than think like, okay, I've got 13 sessions or 8 sessions, is just think, what within that process, what one thing can I do every day that is just going to make me move one step forwards? Like, we don't need to see the whole staircase. We just need to take that first step. And then when you've done that, you're like, okay, that actually wasn't as scary as I thought. Now I can take the next step and see what happens there. And it's a process, because anxiety, depression, grief, trauma, they've all been slowly instilled in you over time. You've put unknowingly unconscious effort into staying in that place, and sometimes re-traumatizing yourself because of where you're at. You know, nobody switched on a switch and all of a sudden you were anxious or had depression. It was lots of little things that happened over time. So that same journey is what you need to take to get out of it as well, just little steps every single day. But it's a scary thing for people. They're used to thinking the way that they do and overthinking stuff and worrying and catastrophizing and feeling laying awake at night because they can't sleep. But it feels like it gives them a sense of control sometimes. But if I don't worry about things, do I leave myself open and vulnerable to not being prepared or ready for what might happen in my life? But actually what you end up doing is getting to a place where you're like, you have that self-belief or that quiet inner confidence to know whatever happens in my life, and there will be things that happen, I know that I can get through it because I've got the right tools to be able to aid me to do that.
It's so empowering, isn't it? Do you know when you're saying that you don't need to see the whole staircase? I remember I was in this running group, fantastic group here where I live, and they were saying to us, when you run up a hill, don't look to the top, look about 1.5 meters in front of you, because if you look up and go, gosh, I've got to go all the way, it's going to feel impossible. But if you look just ahead, just a little bit ahead, so you don't stumble on anything, you'll be up that hill in no time.
Yes, you know, funnily enough, last year I challenged myself to do couch to 5K.
Yeah.
And I have always said I hate running. I'm not a natural runner. That was always my belief system. And I think I did it because I was like, do you know what? I want to get in shape. I want to do some exercise. And, you know, it's free, isn't it? You can go out, you can run around the block. There's no major commitment there. So I did couch to 5K. And where I live, we've got a 13-mile greenway round our town that's obviously all out in the countryside. And I was like, right, I've got a bit of that that's near me. I'm going to run the greenway. And I did it. And at the last bit of my journey is a really steep hill through the countryside, and it was my absolute nemesis every time I went out on a run. But I would do exactly that. I'd look down at my feet and be like, I'm just going to focus on my feet and my breathing, and when I look up, I'll be at the top of the hill. And so the couch to 5K is like, is it 8 weeks, an 8-week program or thereabouts? And I probably got to week 6 and I managed to run the whole hill. And when I got up the top, I was like, oh my God, I did it. Like, I couldn't believe it. But so much of it is just your mindset. The more that you tell yourself, whether it's running or anxiety or any other challenge you're going through in your life, the more you tell yourself you can't, then you won't. Your body achieves what your mind believes. So if your body's not going to try and outshine your mental capacity, so if you tell yourself you can't, of course you're not gonna do it because there's no motivation there. But just little steps again, or trying to tackle it every single time I got to that hill. And I was like, one day I'm gonna get up this flipping hill. And I managed it eventually, and it was the most amazing feeling in the world. And I remember at one point, there's a local running group near me, and they all just breezed past me, chatting away to each other up the hill, whereas I'm like, seriously feel like I'm on the edge of death trying to get to the top of this hill. And I was like, well, one day I want to be like them, where I can run up it with ease and talk to somebody while I'm doing it. But yeah, it's all just whatever you tell yourself, that is your reality. Yeah. So the power of your thoughts is just incredible as to the impact that can have on all areas of your life. You've got to be so mindful about the things that you're thinking.
Yeah, I say to my one of my daughters, I say to her all the time, because she's like, I can't do that, and I go, yet, and she's like, Mummy, that's exactly what Gabby from Gabby's Dollhouse says. I don't know if you're familiar with Gabby's Dollhouse, but she's always goes, yet. I said, but it's true, because yes, you can't do it yet, but there's nothing to say that you won't be able to do it in the future. But do you know what I was thinking as well when you were talking about mindset and being sort of happy in the unhappy state that you've been doing our phytonutrient cleanses, haven't you, that we've from the company that I work with. And I see that so often with people. They message me and go, so this cleanse program you're doing, what is it? And I'm really interested, and blah, blah. And then I talk about what it is, and I answer any questions, and I ask them why they'd want to do it. And it's often like, oh, I just need to do something. I need to look after myself, and this and this and this has come up, and blah, blah. And I go, do you know what? I think it would be brilliant for you. Here are some of the testimonials. Here are some of the things that people are saying. And then it gets to, and we're starting in a couple of weeks. You've got time now. I recommend that you maybe order at least these and these products. It's not compulsory, but this would give you the best results, and it's such a supportive group and all of these things. And then radio silence. And time again, they get back to me and go, oh, I really need to be doing this. And how much was it again? And tell me all about it again. And then you just realize it feels like too big a barrier or a hurdle, because, yeah, potentially, I think some people also secretly feel like they don't deserve to feel well, because I've always been the one historically to look after everyone else. I don't have time to look after me. Everyone else has to go before me, because that was the role I always played in the family. So now this thing that I actually do need, I can't be doing that. I can't look after me, because I would be selfish, because other people need me. When actually, if you don't look after yourself, how are you going to look after everyone else? But I see time and time again. And then there's people like you that just get it. They go, oh yeah, that cleanse sounds amazing, and you've had great results. But you are maybe also in that space where you understand that actually change isn't that scary. And I'm not sure we consciously think, oh, change is really scary, I'm just going to stick with what I've got. I think it's a subconscious thing. But there's so much behind because often it's like, oh, I can't afford that, but you see that they can absolutely afford it, but it's not a priority. But I also do think really so often it's without them knowing, I don't think I'm worthy of this, I don't think I deserve it.
I think that'll come into it a lot. I don't think that I deserve it. And also I think there can often be that feeling of failure tied into financial commitment. What if I spend this money and it doesn't work? I've now lost, it's not a lot, is it, to invest to get the capsules and everything else? Necessarily, it might be for some people, but that's a barrier I see. People will say, I can't afford it. The issue isn't necessarily the money. It's that, what if I invest this money and I don't get the end result? That feels a little bit too scary. So I'm just going to try and do it on my own for a little bit longer until I actually hit rock bottom. And then I need to invest to be able to get myself further forward. But I think, we are natural. Everyone in my space that I work with, we put everybody else first before ourselves all the time. And we wouldn't bat an eyelid if we felt like someone else around us needed that cleanse or that support. We'd be like, yeah, do it. It's what you need. Go for it. But there is that. But if it's me, I'm not worthy spending the money on, because I could be spending it on getting my kids Christmas presents or whatever it might be. We'll reprioritize everything based on the needs of others until we hit rock bottom. And then we're like, right, now I have to do something because I've got no other way out of eating healthily or looking after my mental health. And it's a scary thing, the financial commitment, even if it's for something positive like the cleanse.
Or working with you.
That financial commitment is a huge thing, to be like, am I worthy enough to spend this money on me? And if I do, that financial commitment means that I'm going to have to fully commit to this thing, and I'm not sure if I can do that. I'm not sure if I have it in me to do what's needed to be able to get through. So it's a really big barrier, but we just hold ourselves back for so long until we get to a point where there's no other option and we absolutely need to do that next thing. I wish we were a generation of mothers or women that recognized that your needs matter, and it's not about putting yourself first, but about putting yourself up there with everybody else. Nobody is gonna be sacrificed because you're looking after yourself. It's not a trade-off. It's just you are worthy of the same time and attention that you give to everybody else, and that's an okay thing. But that's also not our messaging. What our messaging is to be a mum that's, or a woman that's always on the go, that is doing all the things, that is trailing around behind everyone, picking everything up. We don't have role models of what a relaxed mum or woman looks like. We don't see that really ever. Maybe in certain circles. And then it can feel quite jarring for people to think, wow, she seems to float through life, and, you know, she's doing all the things, she's into her meditation and her yoga, and it all seems, you know, we've got that kind of, those kind of people are like spiritual woo-woo people, and it feels so different to like modern day society. But actually, like, it's okay to slow down, it's okay to look after yourself. No one's giving you a medal for working yourself into the ground and putting yourself last all the time. But that's kind of where we hang our hats a lot of the time. Like, I have to prove my worth all the time, even if it's putting my own well-being at, you know, it's at the expense of my own well-being. Because we don't bat an eyelids when our partners are like, I'm going to go play golf for 6 hours, or I'm going to go do this. Like, nobody cares, do they? They just go off, they do what they like. But there is something so ingrained in us that I am not allowed to do the same, because I have to be here and I have to look after everybody else first. It's an interesting space. And I think pre-kids, it was never a question. You'd do what you enjoyed all the time. There was no guilt attached to that. There's something about that transition into motherhood that all of a sudden ties you into everybody else's needs for decades before you come out of that and think, wow, I'm ready for a bit of time now, because I've just given 18 years of my life to my kids. We need to balance it from day one, really. It's hard when you've got a newborn, because they literally need you every second of every day.
Yeah.
You know, those early months are really difficult, but that's okay. Like, you've got, you know, spend your day on the sofa, have a slow day doing whatever it is you need to do. But then as you start getting those bits of time back, rather than fill it with other stuff, is just look after yourself so that you can give as much as you want to everybody else. It's got that element of people pleasing in it, which comes hand in hand with perfectionism a lot of the time. If I bend over backwards for everyone else, it makes me worthy, it makes me valuable, and it stops people from seeing that actually on the inside I'm really struggling. But you know, nobody benefits from you being worked into the ground and running on empty batteries all the time. And the positive ripple effect it has through families when you do look after yourself as well is huge. We just don't ever allow ourselves to get to that place.
So, but do you know what? Two things here. Just us having had this conversation now, and other people talking more openly about these things, that's a start, isn't it? And I'm thinking sometimes also, if you don't want to do these things for yourself, do them for your children, because you're breaking this cycle of generational trauma, aren't you? Or when it comes to what I do, like eating healthy, looking after yourself, do it for your children. Then if you can't face doing it for you because that feels too big, do it for them.
100%. Yeah.
Oh, this is so powerful. So powerful. Do you work with people online, Ria? A few people, I would assume that after listening to this, people, you know, a lot of people go, oh, I need to contact her. Do you work with mainly people online? Is it face to face?
Yeah, I do it all online. All of my stuff is online. So I work, one-to-one over something similar to Zoom with people and couples. I've got a self-study program called Reclaiming You that is all about banishing the mum guilt so that you can put in self-care and building your self-esteem and all of those kind of things as well. But yeah, all of my sessions are done online because I find that people feel much more comfortable in the comfort of their own homes to talk openly about how they're feeling than coming to a clinic to, you know, sit in quite a stark environment and talk. So it just makes for much more open and honest conversations when they're at home and feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that. I often find also that if I got somebody close by that I would like to have a session with, they're going for a walk where you just walk, you have a purpose, you don't necessarily look at each other all the time, but you're just going for a walk. That can be quite nice too. But yeah, sitting in front of each other, like literally in the same room, you've driven there, you worked yourself up to the whole thing. It might be nice to just sit with a cup of tea in your PJs and have a session in front of your laptop.
Yeah.
What have I forgotten to ask you? What have we forgotten to talk about? I mean, we could go
Nothing,
on
I
and
don't
on,
think.
right?
Yeah, we've kind of covered everything really. You know, there's an element of grief that I deal with quite a lot, like I've touched on a little bit before. But that grief, you know, it's not necessarily losing someone, a loved one or whatever. It can be relationship breakdowns. It can be, you know, mums go through the great maternal identity shift. It can just be that grief of, I think we all go through that moment of, I miss the life that I had before and I'm not quite sure who I'm becoming just yet. There can be an element of grief within that. So grief and trauma support are really closely linked. So I see a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily label it as grief, but they're going through a life change that is bringing with it a lot of mixed emotions. But yeah, I think we've kind of covered everything really.
Oh, well done, us.
Yeah.
This was fantastic. And I'm going to stop the recording now, and then I'm going to ask you some questions that I want to know from me. But not everyone needs to hear it. But I think this has been fantastically enlightening. Yeah, our mutual friend, she said, I know you're going to have a good conversation. I know there's going to be a lot of gold coming from this. And I feel like I've learned so much from you. So thank you ever so much for taking the time this morning. And let's put all your contact details in the show notes so that for those who want to contact you and see what you have to offer, that they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I offer free 30-minute consultations to anyone and everyone that needs a bit of support or just to get them over a bit of a hump in their lives. So I'll give you the link to that as well. If anyone just needs a quick session to talk through what's going on, then that's available too.
Oh, that's really cool. Thank you so much, Ria.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Small Steps to Wellness show with Mari Craig. I am passionate about helping mums get their energy back through simple nutritional changes, because we know that if mummy is happy, the family is happy. If you would like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram under @smallstepstowellness or visit my website smallstepstowellness.info. Speak to you soon.